Hello, sophomores. Hope everybody's doing well. I have another grammatical concept for you today, and I have 15 minutes before this video cuts me off, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think we'll be just fine, but today we're going to talk about subordinate conjunctions, and really what we're going to focus on is punctuating sentences with subordinate conjunctions and independent clauses and dependent clauses. First, though, we need to talk about the two different types of clauses. Every sentence that you read or write or speak that is complete is made up of clauses. Every sentence that is complete needs to have an independent clause. Sometimes they have more than one independent clause. And quite often sentences will also have dependent clauses. But you have to remember that all clauses, whether they're independent or dependent, all clauses have subjects and verbs. Oh, also, I would get a piece of notebook paper and take notes on this, okay? You're going to want to take notes. You can print out this PowerPoint and take notes on the PowerPoint, or you can just take notes on a piece of workbook paper too. I think workbook paper would be just fine right now. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, all clauses, no matter whether they're independent or dependent, have subjects and verbs, okay? That's the difference between a clause and a phrase, right? Phrases add information to sentences. We talked about prepositional phrases and sentences last semester where we talked about the dog hid under the bed, okay? The dog hid is a complete sentence. Under the bed is a prepositional phrase, just adding information, telling where the dog was hiding, right? Clauses, however, always have subjects and verbs. So actually, the dog hid under the bed as an entire sentence is one independent clause. It has a subject and a verb. It can stand alone as a sentence, right? Dependent clauses are really what we're focusing on today, and dependent clauses still contain a subject and a verb, but they cannot stand alone as a complete sentence without the help of an independent clause, and we'll get to some examples in a second. But first we're going to talk about independent clauses. Move my head there. Okay, so independent clauses, this is kind of a review from what we did last semester, okay? So remember, independent clauses are complete sentences. Sometimes you can join together independent clauses with the help of a coordinate conjunction or a semicolon, right? Which is some things that we did last semester again. So here's some examples. I was late for school this morning, independent clause, right? I is the subject and was is the verb, all right? Down here, I joined two independent clauses together. I was late for school this morning. I got a detention, and I combine that with the comma coordinate conjunction so. So I was late for school this morning, comma, so I got a detention. And then you can string together more than two. Also, I was late for school this morning, comma, so I got a detention, comma, and I had to serve it right after school. Okay. Those are all examples of independent clauses. If you could take any one of these clauses out of the sentence and put them as a sentence by itself, and it would make sense, right? Because it's an independent clause. Now, I don't know why this isn't working. Now, dependent. Oh, sorry, my head's in the way. Dependent clauses are a little bit more tricky because dependent clauses have what we call subordinate conjunctions. And subordinate conjunctions make independent clauses dependent, okay? So this is a list here of subordinate conjunctions. This is not all of the subordinate conjunctions, but it's the most common and the most commonly used on the ACT as well. So that's why this is in my list, okay? I would pause this video and I would make a list in your notes. I would have on one side the coordinate conjunctions, which are only 7 of them, the fanboys, right? And then I would make another list of subordinate conjunctions with all of these conjunctions on it so that you can easily refer to it because you'll have like a worksheet, obviously, and you'll have a quiz over this too. So this will be easy to refer to, okay? So pause this, make that, and then play it again. All right. So if you add one of these words to an independent clause, it automatically makes it dependent. So for example, I was late for school this morning. Again, independent clause. If I walked up to you in school one day and I said, I was late for school this morning, you would be like, okay, sweet, right? But if I walked up to you and I said, because I was late for school this morning, you would be like, yeah, what happened, right? It's no longer a complete sentence. You add that subordinate conjunction to the beginning of it, and now all of a sudden it becomes a dependent clause, and now it's reliant on another independent clause in order for the sentence to make sense. So, for example, because I was late for school this morning, I got a detention. Okay, now that makes sense, right? Now that's a complete thought. You have a dependent clause here, because I was late for school this morning, but you follow it with an independent clause. I got a detention, right? So here's the deal. You have to know how to punctuate these sentences. When you start a sentence with a dependent clause and you shift to an independent clause, you need a comma. But if you start a sentence with an independent clause and you switch to a dependent clause, you don't put a comma. So it's kind of tricky. And again, this is something that as a writer, you choose. You choose how to write this. You could write it either way, it makes sense. After I woke up this morning, comma, I brushed my teeth, right? Look at this word. After is a subordinate conjunction because right after it you have a subject and a verb. I brushed my teeth is an independent clause. I is the subject, brush is the verb, right? So you start the sentence with dependent clause, you shift to independent, so you need a comma. But if you flip-flop those two clauses, I brushed my teeth after I woke up this morning, it's the same thing. It means the same thing, but you don't put a comma. Same thing down here. You probably went to school when you were younger, growing up through school, and you were probably told that you should never start a sentence with because. And that's not correct. You can start a sentence with because, you just have to punctuate it correctly. And when you were younger and learning all of these things, you didn't know how to punctuate that type of a sentence yet, so that's why you were told not to start a sentence with because. But you can totally do that. So because I wasn't invited to the party, comma, I stayed home. Or if you flip-flop it, you don't need a comma. I stayed home because I wasn't invited to the party. No comma. Let's see what's next here. Okay, so here's the tricky part, is that if you look at your list of subordinate conjunctions and you also think back to prepositions, there are quite a few subordinate conjunctions on that list that are also prepositions. So it all depends on how it's used. So this is where you have to remember the difference between a phrase and a clause, right? Prepositional phrases add information to a sentence. Prepositional phrases do not have subjects and verbs. Clauses always have subjects and verbs. Okay, so for example, I studied until I left for the party. Okay, until is also a preposition, but look at what follows the word until in that highlighted portion of the sentence, a subject and a verb, right? So that automatically makes that a dependent clause. You have an independent clause and then a dependent clause. So it changes the type of sentence that it is. Then you have another sentence, kind of reworded a little bit. I studied until the party. Until the party is just a prepositional phrase. So actually, I studied until the party is just a simple sentence, one independent clause. Until I left for the party, comma, I studied. So because you start that sentence with a dependent clause, because look at right after the word until is a subject and a verb, so you put a comma after that clause, now you have a dependent clause, comma, independent clause, okay? Same thing in this next section here. After school this afternoon, comma, I went to the mall. After school this afternoon is just a prepositional phrase, okay? Now, if you add that subject and verb, now it's a clause. After I left school this afternoon, comma, I went to the mall. Remember, we learned this first semester, okay? And so if you can remember, if you start a sentence with a prepositional phrase that's 4 or more words, you use a comma. That's why there's a comma, even though you started the sentence with a prepositional phrase instead of a dependent clause. All right, so there's just so many comma rules, but it's important that you know these. Obviously, you know, when you take the ACT as you're writing, just as you grow up, you're going to need to know this stuff, and you want to look educated in emails that you send and everything else. Okay, so it is the stuff is important. If you start a sentence with a prepositional phrase that's not 4 words or more, you don't need a comma there at all. So that last example that says, after school, I went to the mall. After school is just a prepositional phrase telling when you went to the mall, right? You don't need a comma there, even though it starts a sentence, because it's only 2 words, okay? Oh, and that's it. Okay. You do have, I'll go through this worksheet real quick with you because, okay, these are a couple worksheets that you have to do. For this one, I give you 10 sentences, and then I also give you the answers down there. So if you just scroll to the second page, you can check your answers. But I give you some directions, okay? Because when I talk about independent and dependent clauses, I always underline the independent clauses once. I underline the dependent clauses twice. You should also insert a comma wherever you need a comma, and you can put boxes around the coordinate conjunctions and circles around the subordinate conjunctions, okay? This is probably going to take you a minute to do, but you should, like, now that you've learned about the dependent clauses and the comma rule with subordinate conjunctions and starting sentences with dependent clauses versus independent clauses, all of these grammatical rules that you've learned with commas are starting to come together, okay? So you should be able to do all of these things and hopefully get all of these right, so that then you can go check your answers on the next page. And then I made another worksheet that's the same thing as this one, but I'm going to go over these answers tomorrow on our Zoom, and it actually says that on the worksheet. So there's another 10, and I tell you a little story about my Walmart trip in this worksheet. So I'm sure that's going to just be riveting for you. But I will go over this worksheet tomorrow on our Zoom call. So obviously you can click the link in your email. Oh my gosh, I feel like an influencer. Like, swipe up to join our Zoom call tomorrow. Only don't swipe up, just click the link in the email to join. Okay, guys, I'm bored. I need to, like, go back to school and talk to people. This is crazy. Oh, in our Zoom tomorrow, I have an idea for some fun extra credit for this quiz that you'll have over your subordinate conjunctions. So join our Zoom tomorrow for an extra credit opportunity. It'll be fun. It has nothing to do with English. It's just going to be like a little game that we can play on Zoom. It has to do with rock, paper, scissors. Okay, I'm giving away too much information. I'm done now. I don't know how to end this. Oh my gosh. Okay, have a good day.